Hey everybody, it's Glenn back in this video, and with this year's San Diego Comic-Con not too far away, I'm backtracking to look at last year's Marvel Ant-Man SDCC exclusive set. Regular viewers will have seen me unbox this in a video as part of my order from Kapow Toys, where it set me back $79.99. I love the packaging. More often mass retail necessitates modular boxes, I suppose for better warehousing and optimizing shelf space. Yet con exclusives like this can be a bit more experimental with the packaging and create something a bit more special for the fans. For example, Deadpool's Chimichanga truck box and Taco Blister carded figures it contained. Here we get Ant-Man's giant head. Actually, thinking of it scale-wise, it would have made more sense if that was Giant Man's head. Yet this wanting to capitalize on the release of the Ant-Man movie as much as it can, so Ant-Man it is, in the form of some really nice comic artwork by Clayton Henry. On the back, pictured are all 5 figures in the set. Spoiler for when we look at them out of packaging, all are helped out in this picture by a fair bit of Photoshop. Then likely to the delight of San Diego Comic-Con attendees bringing this home in their suitcases, and in fact to my delight having this shipped to me, the antennae articulate so it can be folded away to avoid damage. The packaging has a door which secures with a Velcro tab. On the reverse of the door is some bio info which reads, "He would prove them wrong, he would show them that imagination means something, that science can make the impossible possible. His discovery will change commerce, combat, travel. These particles, PIM particles, will change the world." So in terms of packaging, mint in package types can, without opening the package itself, have a good gawk at all of the action figures nicely window displayed. But that's not good enough a gawk for purposes of this video, so as I'm opening the packaging to better look at the action figures themselves, and the interior of the box has some really nice art on it featuring Hank Pym's lab. It's going to be a little hard to make out, but on various monitors in the lab you can, well, you can't really see Ultron pictured on that monitor, but down there you can a bit more definitively make out Vision there, and then Ultron is pictured again on this smaller monitor down here. Anyway, here they finally are all unpackaged and lined up. I'm thinking it would be nice to get a set of differently scaled figures all represented in the same costume to illustrate the shrinking / growing effect. Yet here, while they're differently scaled, we get a trio of different aliases, Ant-Man, Goliath and Giant Man, assumed in this instance by 2 different characters, Hank Pym and Scott Lang. As one by one we take a closer look at each, I'll build to the climax by going from smallest to the largest. So first up is an itty bitty Ant-Man. The packaging back states Hank Pym Ant-Man in the original Ant-Man costume. Yet Scott Lang stole that costume, so really it could be Lang too. And tiny he is, measuring less than an inch tall. In spite of that, some nice painted detail. However, no posability. Pretty sure this is a reuse of the tiny Ant-Man that came packed with the Marvel Infinite series Ant-Man. The huge downside is that he is unable to stand up. Fortunately, I have the Anthony accessory that came packed with the Marvel Legends movie Ant-Man, so instead of laying on his face or flat on his back, atop of him is a good place for him. Then bumping up scale slightly to the second Ant-Man, which stands 1.5 inches tall. The packaging back tells us this is Scott Lang, and more definitively him as Ant-Man and not Hank Pym, as this is a Lang specific costume. Like the smaller previous figure, this one is also static with no posability, but at least I'm pretty sure it's new to this set, and further still represents the debut in toy form of this costume. Relatively speaking, it was a short-lived one in the comics. The biggest strike against this rendering of it is the lack of detail on the helmet. So looks like the visor of a motorcycle helmet. Would have been nice to see more of the detail it had in the comics. Moving back to Hank Pym, here in somewhat of a variant of the Infinite series 3 3/4 inch Ant-Man that the tiny Ant-Man we first looked at came with. First difference being he is wearing a white lab coat over his jazzy Ant-Man costume. Might make more sense had he been in civvies under the lab coat, yet maybe he's taking only the quickest break from adventuring to do some science. Or more probably explained by, in comics we identify heroes by their costumes. It's the same way when the X-Men have breakfast at the mansion, Jean Grey is drawn flipping pancakes in a full Phoenix outfit. That way we know it's her. Same thing here, so folks can be like, oh, Ant-Man costume costume under there. It's Hank Pym and not random guy in a lab coat. Although me saying that, I'm sure some people would love a random guy in a lab coat action figure. I've heard the lab coat and maybe the arms are inherited from a different Hasbro line, a G.I. Joe action figure in fact, but someone more familiar with the G.I. Joe verse than me can pipe up in the comments below and tell us exactly which one. The lab coat can be removed, but of course that leaves him with white sleeved arms. Would have been cool had they been interchangeable, plugging in and out of the shoulder socket, then come with regular Ant-Man costume ones to plug in, creating a lab to field transformation. But we do get an interchangeable head. But before I make that switch, let's take a closer look at the head sculpt, and for me this is why I've never been the biggest proponent of this scale, as the face sculpt is just a bit too on the soft side. I like to see a more defined sculpt. Let's see how easy the head can be swapped. Well, that popped off surprisingly easy, but getting this helmeted head on is a bit more of a struggle. There. It's okay, however I wish it had antennae. Looks like it has ports for them, yet without the antennae it just looks a bit naked to me. Then getting in under there where the antennae should be and above his eyes, seems like the silver paint hasn't quite reached into that recess, leaving some flesh coloured plastic peeping through. Now looking at articulation, and the head rotates side to side, and you saw when I interchanged it, it's just on a ball, no neck hinge, but the head does move up and down on that ball slightly. At the shoulder his arms rotate and then they hinge up this far. There's upper arm rotation followed by single jointed elbows. Then at the wrist his hands just rotate, no wrist hinge. Then as I open his lab coat you can see there is no waist rotation, but in lieu of that he has a rotating diaphragm joint which crunches forward, and well, I can't really see with a lab coat how far it crunches back. Then at the hips his legs move out to the side, not particularly far. There is upper leg rotation followed by double jointed knees. Then at the ankles his feet are hinged, moving backwards and forwards, and they also rotate. Alas, no ankle pivot, which sucks, as without it he's kind of tricky to get standing, if I'm honest. It's like one of his legs is shorter than the other, leaving him to kind of rock back and forth unsteadily. Now moving on from the 3 3/4 inch Ant-Man to the 6-inch Goliath, which as a 6-inch action figure falls most into the focus of my collecting. To that end, I don't think I'm alone as a collector in honing a collection towards a particular scale. However, with Ant-Man and his size-changing powers, you could argue his figures fit into any scale. Yet while the Goliath reuses the Bucky Cap body from 6-inch scale Marvel Legends, I'd say the set is 3 3/4 inch scale, taking the lab coat Ant-Man as the standard sized figure of the set. And I say that just because if from a Marvel Legends perspective we take Goliath as the standard size, then I see it as odd that in comparison Hank Pym has shrunk to the size of a child to potter about his lab. Of course, in isolation this Goliath fits perfectly into Marvel Legends. Goliath was the 3rd alias assumed by Hank Pym following Ant-Man and Giant Man respectively, first appearing in the Avengers 28 in May 1966. As the Goliath name implies, like Giant Man, he focused his size-altering powers to often grow in size. So Goliath, the 3rd alias of Hank Pym, and this Goliath marks the 3rd appearance of this particular alias in the modern Marvel action figure era, first appearing in Marvel Legends Series 4 over a decade ago. That one being a repaint of a pre-Legends Giant Man, so incorrectly has Giant Man's antennae. Then appeared again in 2009, this time as a 12-inch sized action figure, but in the 3 3/4 inch scale Marvel Universe Gigantic Battles box set. That time having an original head like this one with Goliath's signature visor. Now with that visor and the blue and yellow colours of the costume, squint and he's kinda Cyclops looking. And speaking of the X-Men, he does suffer very slightly from the paint deco problem that plagued the Toys R Us exclusive all-new X-Men box set from a few years back, in that the yellow paint has been applied with not the best coverage, leaving the blue plastic from underneath to be patchily visible through it, but I think it's coming across actually better on camera than it is to the naked eye. Beyond the head, the other addition here is the belt, which is a separate vinyl piece fitted around the waist. And for articulation, click this for my Marvel Legends Ant-Man Infinite Series Giant Man review, also on the Bucky Cap body, so sharing exactly the same articulation. Now moving on to our climax, and we might just have to fake it here with Giant Man, this being him in his relatively recent Marvel Now costume, and honestly was a bit of a wasted opportunity as this set followed hot on the heels of the Marvel Marvel Legends Giant Man, so provided a supersized, timely opportunity to complement that one. Yet as I enlarged the Legends Giant Man, same costume, yet otherwise not very much synergy between the two. Much of that is owing to the SDCC Giant Man reusing the Marvel Legends Icon Cyclops, Icons being the 12-inch scale spin-off sister line of the 6-inch scale Marvel Legends, with certain aspects of the sculpt betraying that origin. These include the sculpt of sort of buckles around the ankle, then a ridge raised in relief which on the Icon Cyclops would have been the top of his boot, some more sculpt around the wrists like that of the ankles, then the most telling is the addition of his belt, which was merely deco on the 6-inch Legends version that was complained about, but the addition here is simply to cover the X logo belt from Cyclops. Now if a reuse of a body is logical and effective, I tend not to complain. It's when the reuse begins to feel like a square peg being forced through a round hole that I pipe up, and that's how I feel here. When it comes to the head, it is without those trio of rectangular shapes from either side of the head that the Legends one has, and I really don't like these antennae. It's more like they're becoming antlers. It's a shame because when the Marvel Legends Giant Man came out, everybody scoffed at the 6-inch not-so-giant Giant Man. Then it seemed like prayers might be answered with a Giant Man that in stature is more fitting of his name. But one, it was a con exclusive, so not readily available to most collectors. And secondly, it's just not very good. And for all those who ask just how it stacks up against various other Giant Man action figures, whether it be the old Toy Biz Giant Man Bath or Hasbro's new Civil War Giant Man Bath, well, you're gonna have to stay tuned as I have a pretty special Giant Man video coming soon. Action Figure Evolution. Looking at the articulation, and the head rotates side to side, yet he isn't able to look up any, but he is able to look down, and I guess being giant, that's appropriate as more often than not he'd be looking down at people, right? At the shoulder, his arms, it's pretty stiff, but they rotate and then they hinge up this far. There's upper arm rotation followed by a double jointed elbow. Then at the wrists, the hands rotate and they're also hinged, moving down and up. He has waist rotation and also an ab crunch, which crunches quite a decent amount forward, but then it doesn't really crunch that far back. At the hips, his legs move out to the side super far, and then with some finagling at the ball joint of the hip, they move this far forward, and then they move this far back. There's upper leg rotation, followed by a double jointed knee. Ooh, that's stiff. And then at the ankle, the feet are hinged, moving backwards and forwards, and he has rotation, but no ankle pivot. Boo! So all things considered, and had Hasbro fully invested in the set, they could have knocked it out of the park with this one. As it is, with the various figures being co-opted from different eras and lines, the figures of the set just don't hang together well. Maybe one day they'll try something similar. With Giant Man being a highlight of Civil War, who would be in on a set of movie Ant-Man / Giant Man figures that have a real nice synergy together? Anyway, click this video if you missed my review of the Marvel Legends Civil War War Machine and Disco Armor Iron Man. Be sure to give this video a Giant Man sized thumbs up, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.